I used to believe that betrayal arrived loudly, shattered trust, raised voices, slammed doors. I was wrong. For me, it began quietly, in the spaces my husband no longer noticed. Our marriage had become a routine of polite exchanges and shared silence. We lived together efficiently, like co-workers managing a household. He was always busy, always tired, always somewhere else even when he sat across from me at the table. I told myself this was normal. Years do that to people. Love settles. Passion softens. That's what I said out loud. Inside, though, something was thinning. The house felt larger than it should have. Evenings stretched too long. I filled my time with small tasks, reorganizing drawers that didn't need it, replaying conversations that never quite happened. I missed being asked how I felt. I missed being seen. That was when my stepson came back into our daily lives. He was grown, fully an adult, with a life already shaped by choices I hadn't been part of. He moved with an ease that felt unfamiliar in our quiet home. He listened when I spoke. He laughed easily. Nothing about it felt dangerous at first. It felt human. Around the same time, my nephew began spending more time with us. Family circumstances, temporary help, excuses that made sense on the surface. He, too, was an adult, and he carried a warmth I hadn't realized I was starving for. Conversations that started casually lingered longer than they should have. Words landed softly but stayed with me. I noticed myself waiting for those moments, shared coffee, late conversations in the living room, the comfort of being included. I told myself it was harmless. Family talks. Normal connection. I ignored the small warning signs, the way my heart quickened, the way I chose my words more carefully, the way silence felt heavier after they left the room. My husband didn't notice, or maybe he did, and simply didn't know what he was seeing. He trusted me completely. That trust wrapped around me like both a comfort and a weight. At night, lying beside him, I stared at the ceiling and argued with myself. I hadn't done anything wrong. Not really. No lines had been crossed. No promises broken. And yet, a quiet truth pressed against my chest, something had shifted. I was no longer just lonely. I was aware of possibilities I shouldn't have been considering. I began keeping parts of my day to myself. Small things at first, details I didn't share, smiles I didn't explain. The cracks were still invisible, but they were spreading beneath the surface. I didn't know then how far they would go. I only knew that something inside me had already stepped into dangerous territory, long before anyone else could see it. And once that step was taken, there was no going back to who I had been before. I told myself I was still in control. That whatever was happening existed only in my head, harmless and temporary. But control is a fragile illusion when loneliness has already chosen its companions. Conversations that once happened in shared spaces began drifting elsewhere. A quiet moment in the kitchen. A late evening discussion when the house felt asleep even if it wasn't. Nothing overt. Nothing anyone could point to and say, that's where it went wrong. And yet, I felt it every time. With my stepson, it was understanding. He spoke to me as if my thoughts mattered, as if my experiences carried weight. He asked questions my husband no longer did. When I answered, he listened, not distracted, not rushed. I caught myself opening up, revealing parts of myself I hadn't planned to share. Each time, I promised it would be the last. With my nephew, it was warmth. A kind of attention that made me feel lighter, younger somehow. He made ordinary moments feel less heavy. I laughed more around him, and that alone felt like a betrayal I couldn't quite explain. The dangerous part wasn't what we said, it was what we didn't say out loud but clearly understood. The pauses. The looks held just a second too long. The awareness that something unspoken existed between us. I began editing my life. I mentioned conversations to my husband without details. I avoided eye contact when certain names came up. I kept my phone face down, not because there was proof of wrongdoing, but because I feared what my own expressions might reveal. At night, guilt crept in like a quiet ache. I would replay the day, searching for the moment I should have pulled back. There were many. I ignored all of them. I told myself stories to justify it. My marriage was already distant. I wasn't being touched, Not emotionally, not truly. I wasn't doing anything, just talking, just feeling. Surely that didn't count. But feelings have momentum. I noticed how my mood depended on their presence. How silence felt sharper when they weren't around. How I anticipated conversations before they happened. That realization scared me more than anything else. There were moments when I almost stopped. When a single thought, "This is wrong," rose clearly enough to make me hesitate. In those moments, I could have chosen differently. I could have drawn a line, rebuilt boundaries, spoken to my husband honestly. Instead, I stayed quiet. I let the closeness deepen without naming it. I allowed emotional doors to remain open, even as I pretended not to notice how far they had already swung. By the time I admitted the truth to myself, that I was emotionally entangled in ways I never should have been, it no longer felt like a sudden fall. It felt like something I had been slowly, carefully walking into. And the worst part, a part of me didn't want to turn back. Living with a secret changes the way time moves. Days slow down, heavy with anticipation and fear, while nights rush past in restless fragments. By the time I reached that stage, I could no longer pretend I was untouched by what I'd allowed to grow. Nothing dramatic had happened, no single moment I could isolate and blame. Yet everything felt different. The house that once felt merely quiet now felt watchful. Every conversation carried an echo. Every glance seemed loaded with meaning only I could hear. I began to withdraw from my husband, not because I cared less, but because I cared too much in the wrong direction. His questions felt dangerous. His casual affection made my chest tighten with guilt. I responded with short answers, distracted smiles, excuses that piled up faster than I could justify them. He noticed, of course. He asked if I was tired, if something was wrong, if work or family stress was getting to me. I nodded, deflected, reassured him. He accepted it, because trust had always been our foundation. That trust sat between us like an unspoken accusation. Inside, I was unraveling. Every interaction with my stepson and nephew felt heavier now, not exciting, not comforting, but charged with consequence. I became hyper-aware of how things looked from the outside. A laugh held too long. A conversation interrupted. A door closing at the wrong moment. I imagined suspicion where there was none, and it terrified me. The guilt didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in slowly, contaminating moments that had once felt harmless. I found myself avoiding mirrors, as if my reflection might expose what I'd done. I questioned my own morality, my sense of self, the woman I believed I was. Was I still a good wife if my heart felt divided? Was silence a form of betrayal on its own? Some nights, I lay awake beside my husband, listening to his steady breathing, and wondered how someone could be so close and yet so completely unaware. The intimacy we shared felt fragile, almost borrowed, like something I no longer deserved. The fear of discovery became constant. A misplaced phone, a sudden pause in conversation when someone entered the room. Once, my husband almost overheard a private exchange, not incriminating, but intimate enough that my heart pounded for hours afterward. I smiled through dinner, barely tasting the food, convinced the truth was written all over my face. I started to understand that the real damage wasn't what anyone else might see. It was what I could no longer unsee. I had crossed emotional boundaries I couldn't uncross. I had chosen secrecy over honesty, comfort over integrity. And no matter how carefully I behaved now, the knowledge stayed with me, quiet, persistent, unforgiving. By then, it was no longer about temptation. It was about living with the weight of a choice I couldn't undo. And the deeper truth I was forced to face was this: even if no one ever found out, I already had. There is a moment when you stop fearing discovery and start fearing yourself. That was where I ended up, standing quietly inside a life that looked unchanged, while knowing I had altered it forever. Nothing exploded. No accusations. No confessions. The world continued as if nothing had happened. That, somehow, was the hardest part. My husband still trusted me. He still reached for my hand, still spoke of plans, still believed in the version of me I had already lost. Every act of normalcy felt like a test I was failing in silence. I answered his kindness with restraint, afraid that too much closeness might shatter the fragile balance holding everything together. The connections I had allowed to grow did not disappear overnight. They faded slowly, awkwardly, weighed down by the same guilt that consumed me. Conversations became careful. Distance returned, but this time it wasn't empty, it was heavy with what we all chose not to acknowledge. I realized then that endings don't always come with closure. Sometimes they simply leave scars. I asked myself the question over and over, should I tell him? Would honesty be an act of courage, or cruelty? Would the truth free us, or destroy everything we had built? There was no answer that didn't hurt someone. In quiet moments, I confronted the reality I had avoided for so long. I hadn't been powerless. I hadn't been trapped. I had made choices, small ones, repeated daily, that led me here. Loneliness explained my actions, but it did not excuse them. I began to see the betrayal for what it truly was. Not a single act, but a pattern of silence. A willingness to accept emotional comfort from places I never should have looked. A decision to protect myself from discomfort at the cost of honesty. Some nights, I imagine a different version of the past. One where I spoke up sooner. One where I faced the emptiness in my marriage instead of escaping it. But imagination offers no refunds. The truth is, I still don't know what the future holds. I live with a secret that breathes quietly beneath everyday life. It waits in pauses, in memories, in moments when trust feels undeserved. Perhaps one day the truth will surface. Perhaps it won't. Either way, I understand now that some consequences don't require exposure to exist. They live inside you. I betrayed my husband long before he ever knew. And whether or not he ever does, I will carry that knowledge with me, permanent, unresolved, and impossible to erase. Some secrets don't end relationships. They end innocence. And once that's gone, nothing is ever quite the same again.